Welcome to the webinar on the National Academy of Education Spencer Dissertation Fellowship application. My name is Jack Busby. I am the Senior Director at the National Academy of Education, overseeing professional development and membership. With me today is my colleague, Taylor Johnson, Program Officer, and Dr. Dorothy Espelage, Chair of the Dissertation Selection Committee and Professor of Education at the University of North Carolina. All right. Next slide, please. Here's just an overview of what we're going to be providing with you. We're going to go through some technical remarks just in case you have any challenges, and then we're going to dive into the fellowship, the application, and very importantly, writing for your audience, who will actually be reviewing your applications and what are they looking for. The bulk of what we're trying to be able to provide for you today as candidates for this fellowship is really just an opportunity to answer your questions. So there will be a lot of time for Q&A. Next slide, please. If you have any technical issues or cannot hear us for any reason, please write to us via the Q&A box. If you happen to see the chat box, please know that we're not using the chat box feature. So please do use the Q&A. I will ask that unless you're having technical issues, you just hold off on the Q&A for now and just wait until the very end because we might go over something that you have a question for. And then also, please note that we are recording this webinar, so we will be posting it. We will notify you when it's available, so that is also another opportunity to review the information that we're sharing to you. Next slide, please. All right, the fellowship information. All right, while the webinar is primarily about the application process, I do want to briefly describe the benefits of the fellowship. The fellowship is funded by the Spencer Foundation, and it is administered by us at the NAEd. It is intended to be a capstone to your dissertation writing experience, where we will provide you with support and mentorship. If you are selected, you will receive a non-renewable $27,500 stipend for 1 year, and you will attend 2 mandatory retreats, one in the fall and one in the spring. The fall retreat is held along with our members' annual meeting, which is a great opportunity to meet many different senior scholars. These retreats are a keystone of your fellowship experience. You will receive mentorship from a member or one of our former fellows, network with your cohort and our membership, and receive professional development. During the spring retreat, you will present the results of your research as part of a Fellows Forum panel experience. You also have the option to participate in a poster presentation at ARA in the future ARA. Regarding administration of the fellowship, you may directly administer your funds or request your university to administer them. We support either option and recommend you make this decision in partnership with your department. Next slide, please. Regarding eligibility, you should be all but dissertation ABD by the time the fellowship period begins on June 1st, 2025. You do not have to be a U.S. citizen for this fellowship, but you must be enrolled in a doctoral program at a U.S. institution of higher education. The award supports the fellowship recipient with the final analysis and writing of their dissertation. You must complete your data collection and initial analysis before June 1st, 2025. If you cannot meet this deadline, clearly articulate in your application how and when you will collect your data and how this will not impede finalizing your dissertation by the end of the grant period. Next slide, please. All right. The timeline that you present in your application is an important indicator in the selection process, with the committee paying careful attention to pre- and post-award milestones. In your timeline, present a reasonable plan for how you will complete coursework, data collection, initial analysis, comprehensive exams, and the defense of your proposal. Your post-award tasks should include writing milestones and your final dissertation defense. While the end of the fellowship does not necessarily need to align with your dissertation defense, they should not be too different. You must hold the fellowship for a minimum of 9 months, so you should have sufficient work left to fill this timeline. If your defense will be a year or more away from the proposed end of your fellowship, You should ensure you have a reasonable timeline for finishing pre-award tasks. If you have sufficient time left before graduation, then you may consider submitting next year. All right. So the process timeline, once the application portal closes on October 3rd, and please note that this is a hard date, NAEd staff will review applications for completeness and appropriateness. Staff will then assign your applications to 2 external reviewers who are not a part of the selection committee. We very much try to closely align your research to the expertise of these reviewers, but perfect matches are often not possible. Reviews are then sent to our selection committee. Several members of the committee will read your application and present an overview of their review and of the external reviewers during a meeting held in February. In March, we will notify you if you are moving to the semi-finalist stage. If a semi-finalist, we will ask you to submit an update to our committee regarding your proposal, the timeline, and your budget. We will then hold a second selection committee meeting in April, where we will select the 35 finalists. We will then update you on your status in May. The earliest the fellowship can begin then is in June, and with the majority of our fellows beginning between June and September. All right, and I'll pass it to Taylor.
So the application portal. So what you see in front of you is a snapshot of our application portal. And of course, if you experience any difficulties with the online application, or it doesn't necessarily look right, or you have a question regarding one of the prompts that you've been asked to answer, please definitely reach out to the National Academy for staff assistance. It's also very important that you make sure that you're applying to the correct fellowship. On the top ribbon, you can see that we offer quite a variety of programs. So when you create an account and you log in, please definitely make sure that you are completing the appropriate application. If you're a previous applicant, you do need to start a new application. Our team and the selection committee will not review an application that was submitted from last year. As a reminder, the deadline for the application is October 3rd at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You and your references must meet this deadline. Again, this is a hard date and a hard time, and our team will not accept late submissions, add any additional documentation to your application, or edit your application on your behalf after this timeline. To continue the application portal process, you must complete all required fields to submit your application and mark it as complete. You must submit all documentation in a PDF format and to ensure that your PDF is not locked. This not only minimizes the errors and difficulties for us down the line, but also streamlines your application review process. For example, sometimes we receive transcripts that are uploaded that can only be opened by the student, the institution, and/or our access privileges will lock us out or lock out our reviewers after a certain amount of time. So before you upload your PDFs, please make sure that none of these securities are in place before you update your PDF. It's also very important that you talk to your reference writers well in advance of preparing for your application. You want to give them plenty of time to write a strong letter of recommendation as the selection committee reviews these submissions critically. So please do remember that you and your letters of recommendation writers have the same deadline of October 3rd. So within our application portal, we send automated emails when you input the names of your references with instructions and a link to upload their letters of recommendation. So you as an applicant receive a confirmation when the letter has been submitted by your writer. And then in our application portal, you can also send them reminders before the due date to ensure that they have the link and the appropriate documentation and/or instructions to know what to put into the letter of recommendation. And then throughout the selection process, we provide written updates by email. So it's very, very important that when you are importing your email addresses and the email addresses of your letters of recommendation, that you are importing them correctly.
Great.
My apologies, went too far. Sorry. To close out the application portal, I want to provide 2 points of advice. Number one is all application components, including the letters of recommendation, are again due October 3rd at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We strongly recommend that you take a look at our application, get a feel for the questions, and provide your letters of recommendation writer email addresses so that they also have time and access to the links to upload your information. So once again, our deadline is October 3rd for both you and your letters of recommendation. And then point number two is, additionally, since we are a relatively small staff, we typically have a difficult time keeping up with our information box. If you and or your letters of recommendation writers have questions, it's best to try to contact us before the last day of the application, just so that we have enough time to answer your questions and so that you can receive our responses and then edit your application before the portal closes. And then once again, please plan accordingly. If you have any questions that you want us to address, definitely ask before it's too late. As closer to the end dates of our application, it tends to get a little bit busier, and it takes our staff a little bit longer to create these responses. And then with the application overview complete, I'd like to turn our presentation over to Dorothy Espelage, who will now talk about your narrative and the audience.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's good to see 460 of you on this webinar. It's great. It's great. And so thank you so much for Jack and Taylor clearly saying the deadline and giving us a review of the portal, which is very lovely. My job here is to make sure that you really have some ideas about how to create a strong narrative. And one important aspect of that is knowing who your audience is. So who's going to be reviewing? So you have two external reviewers that are not part of the selection committee that will review your application. And as Jack said, they try to match your topic area, your research topic to those reviewers. May not be always possible given the selection, given the reviewers that we may have. But so generally, those that are reviewing your narrative are academics doing education or education-related research in diverse fields, from education psychology to sociology to economics. So multiple disciplines are represented on the selection committee. The National Academy of Education has done a really nice job of making sure that we have equal representation across the disciplines. And that also includes expertise in methodological and analytic approaches, from quantitative to qualitative to mixed methods approaches, which is great. So if you think, so just know that there will be methodological and analytic expertise to evaluate your research questions and your design. Again, remembering that those initial readers for the proposal will not be on the selection committee. Very, very important, right? Because if in fact we have academics represented from different fields, we have different ways of talking about the same thing right across our fields in education-related research. So we want to avoid that specific subdiscipline, what we call jargon. So you want to write it so someone in any field can understand what you are doing and why it's important. So very clear in the writing. And as we're going to talk about in a minute, it's helpful to show drafts of your narrative to folks that may be studying education work, but might be outside of your specific discipline. Next slide, Taylor. So what does your audience need to know, right? So the selection committee and external reviewers, we want to make sure that they understand the importance of your research to education. When we review these narratives, like we love if we end when we read a narrative to say this work has to be done, right? This hasn't been done, and it's so important to the field of research. So again, showing your narrative to others will help. It could be really, really important, but it might be something you're proposing that the quality or the feasibility of the project might not fit within the scope of the fellowship. And many of us, are overzealous sometimes with our research questions. So you always should be asking yourself, did I make this, really clear that it was important, but also what is the feasibility of the project? And it is important for us because what we're trying to do here is to build a pipeline of really strongly, wonderfully trained, diverse education researchers or researchers that are doing education-related types of scholarship. So will you contribute to education research in the future? And make sure that you talk about that, because that's an important criteria, as you can imagine, that the National Academy of Education is administrating this for Spencer, and that's a priority. One thing that isn't important, that you can have a really, really strong narrative, but if the letters of recommendation are not as strong and don't kind of back up the point of the importance or the quality and feasibility, and you as a potential education researcher in the future, that could be problematic. On the other side, we want to make sure that you tell your story of the importance and the quality and feasibility, and don't leave it to the letters of recommendation to highlight the importance of your study. We want to, as we spend lots of hours reviewing your narrative, be able to say, yes, this is a strong narrative, it's important, it's high quality, it can be done within the time frame, and this is a good candidate to do this, that's going to be a great future education researcher. And the letters say that, and your career goals and personal statement with the various questions that are asked in the application all communicate this information. So we really do take this multi-informative approach of this from the different modalities of what's in the application. Next slide. So what does your audience need to know? So the importance, as I've said, what's at stake research-wise? How will our understanding differ based on the outcomes of your research, right? And so that's important to say that this is a gap in the literature, this hasn't been studied. And if you make those kinds of statements, make sure that that's the case, because rest assured your external reviewers that are doing the work in your space will know the classic research that's out there, and also some of the cutting edge things that might be going on. So how specifically would you expect what you learn to impact education for the better? So as you're writing that, is it clear that we get to the end of the introduction of the literature review to your specific aims or your research hypotheses, that this work has to be done and it fits and it's going to address and advance education research, right? So we can have that, but we also want to make sure that you're paying attention to the quality of the research. What is your overall approach, and why is it appropriate to the research question? So you can have a really great research question, and it should beg the type of approach that you want to take. Provide specifics of data collection and analysis so that it is clear that the research questions can be addressed. And again, you have limited space, so you have to really be on top of how it is that you describe these specifics. If there are any important limitations to your approach, raise them and discuss them. Any limitations or challenges that you might anticipate, we always, as reviewers, like to see that there's a level of awareness of the challenges that you might face, especially in doing educational research within the current climate. So we also, as a review, are really going to evaluate the quality of you as the applicant. We're going to ask the question of, does the applicant show promise and motivation and contribute to education research in the long term? So make sure you really explicate that in your application. Now, we also know that no one expects your dissertation to be your greatest contribution. We hope in the Academy, and the National Academy of Education hopes that this actually gives you the mentorship and the experience of conducting independent research to launch your career into the education and world. So that's what we're hopeful that we will evaluate you against. Next slide. All right, so recommendations. So consider your timeline carefully, right? We've got, as they said, October 3rd at 5 p.m. Eastern, hard deadline. So thinking about where you are in your program of study as well. So consider your timeline carefully, not too early, not too late. You need to show that it's feasible, that you can complete the project. However, make sure it doesn't look like you've already completed the project. Remembering that this fellowship supports final analysis and write-up during the fellowship year. So if you're too far along, the committee will notice that, and reviewers will notice that too, and it doesn't fit with the mission of this particular competition. Some of you may be in programs in which a multi-paper or a 3-paper dissertation is part of the norm. And there are some of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, a 3-paper dissertation, and you may be where it's a book project or it's just one study that you do. So the committee struggles with this because we're all from different disciplines and have different opinions about this. But I think where we've landed is that you do not have enough space to talk about the 3-paper studies, all of the 3 papers and the 3 parts of the dissertation. So it might be a better idea to focus on one of the papers as the main topic. Again, recommendations. Talk to your advisor, talk to your letter writers to have a conversation about that. Check your writing. Request feedback from many colleagues and non-practitioners. Part of what we do in the academy is we put our stuff out there and we get feedback, and usually it's better. And they can point out things that we don't see as we've sat and worked on something for hours and hours. Go for a coherent narrative. Use the acronyms and jargon as appropriate. Just make sure to remember that the selection committee may not be in your area, but are generally interested in reading about your research. Support your reference writers. The advisor's letter is critical. You can imagine how competitive this is. So it may come down to those receiving the fellowship that have the most compelling letter that's detailed and persuasive. And remembering that we should not have to look at the letters to figure out what you're trying to say in the narrative. So just keep that in mind, Taylor. Okay, so there is opportunity to use the appendix. The selection committee, however, is not required to read the appendices, so keep that in mind. And that is something, if you write grants and fellowships for the rest of your career, that you must pay attention to that. That's a lot more work to look at those appendices. So, be very careful of what you include. If the narrative should include all the critical information for the reviewers and the selection committee to evaluate all those aspects of the narrative. Information in the appendix should be elaborative. So it should just add additional support to what's in the narrative, but we should be able to understand what you're doing based on the main body of the narrative. Next. And so I know we have questions, 23 questions in the Q&A.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to turn to the Q&A, which, as we shared in the very beginning, is something that we always love to provide during these webinars and probably a central feature. Please do use that Q&A box that you see in the bottom right. And please also be aware that the 3 of us are going to be trying to navigate it. Sometimes it gets flooded in there. If we happen to be going 10, 20, 30 minutes in and we just haven't gone to your question yet, do feel free to, reinsert it, but know that we're working through it. If it turns out that we do not answer your question, it might just be too specific. And if that's the case, or maybe we just ran out of time, or if you think of something afterwards, then please send us an email at info@naeducation.org, and then either Taylor or myself will respond to you. So with that, we will focus on the questions that are now definitely flooding in. So thank you all so much for doing that. All right. Okay. All right, I'll start with an easy one while everyone else is looking. And there's a question here about, about recording. So we are recording the webinar, and we are going to be sharing the recording of the webinar to everyone who has registered. So not that you have to be in attendance right now, but that you've registered, and we will email that out to everybody in the near future, probably within the week. Most likely we're going to upload it to YouTube, but know that we will be sending this information to you.
I'll take an easy one. Where are the retreats held? They're held in the National Academy of Science building in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm. And we generally hold these retreats in mid to late October or early November for the fall. And then for the spring, we tend to hold them during the mid-March. And then, of course, if you would like to go to ARA, those are usually mid to late April.
I can take another one. Not all of my publications or presentations fit on the application. Should we use the most current experiences, or is it better to show the most early experiences mixed in with the most recent. Well, it's a good problem to have, right? So if I were you, if you had presented at education-related conferences, I would include those. And then publications are always good. Publications, if you have so many that you have to pick ones that are related to the topic of the narrative is what I would suggest. I don't know if Jack or Taylor want to add to that answer. No, I think it's pretty good.
Sorry, I was trying to read questions.
Reading the.
I know.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Someone asked, I wonder if a dissertation with data collection in other countries other than the United States would be considered for financial support. The answer is yes. Data collection can occur outside of the United States as long as you as an applicant are affiliated with a United States institution while completing your dissertation program.
There's one question related to, they can only submit one application, correct?
Correct.
One application. If there's a mistake with the letter of recommendation, is it possible to resubmit the letter?
So if an individual receives the link and needs to update their letter of recommendation, they can email our info box and provide the PDF, and I can upload it on their behalf. But you just have to catch me before the deadline of the application.
So another question, are there references required to have a PhD degree? I would say no, but they tend to, right? You want to answer that, Jack?
Well, I was going to say, when it comes to the references, and we have several questions that have come in about references, we have, I think, two main requirements, and that is that one of the references must be from your dissertation director or chair. So that's very important. And then the other one must come from a faculty member. So those are really our only recommendations that we have here. Now, we have a lot of guidance that we provide when it comes to these references. But the most important thing is that you really want to choose somebody that knows you and knows your work very well. Even though staff are not evaluators when it comes to the applications, we do sit in on the committee meetings. And I'll share that the selection committee members can tell when a reference writer is writing for a project where they are not very familiar with what is happening, and where the references do know what's happening and they do know the work and the progression of the student. And that does make a big distinction when it comes to having a better understanding of what you're putting forward and how you might do in the fellowship or in the application process. So the requirements are dissertation director or chair, and then one other faculty member, but really try to find somebody who knows your work very well.
So Jack and Taylor, there's a lot of questions related to if they haven't defended their proposal, or if they plan to defend their proposal by spring 2025, would they be eligible?
So the main requirement is that you must be ABD, all but dissertation, by June 1st of 2025. That is the important date. If you're not going to be all but dissertation by June 1st, 2025, then you should, if you're going to be around that time period, you should still apply, and then make sure that you put it in the timeline why you may be a little bit afterwards. But that is an important deadline that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Will reviewers see all materials during the first round of review? The answer is yes. Regardless of if it is external reviewers and or the selection committee, they will all have your application materials, which would be the narrative, the letters of recommendation, and the appendix if they choose to read it. But yes, they all have the information accessible.
And a little bit more when it comes to the reviewers. When it comes for the external reviewers, these are individuals who are not part of the selection committee, but we very much try to pair your application to individuals who will know the body of work very well. That is our goal. That then helps guide the review that the selection committee accomplishes. Within the selection committee, we do, again, as staff, try to pair the application to individuals on the committee who will know very well your work, bearing in mind any kind of conflicts of interest, say with the institution, or maybe have a, the individual on the committee. When it comes to the or the third review, I should say, when we're reviewing the semifinalists, that's when it really broadens. And we will have committee members who are reviewing your application who are most likely outside of your discipline. And because of that, we very much recommend, as Dorothy was sharing earlier, that you keep in mind the jargon that you're using and that you are writing to a broad audience. And this is why we do recommend that you try to have people outside of your discipline review your application, because then they can be able to ask you very specifically, like this, if something is unclear to them, it gives you an opportunity to frame it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
I see a question here about funding. Along with the stipend that we provide, everything else that has to do with the professional development or mentorship, we will fund as well. So your trips to DC for the fall retreat and spring retreat, we fund that. That includes travel arrangements, hotel, and anything else around it that might be important. And then if you choose to present your research at ARA, and very specifically at ARA, they tend to have a poster presentation. If you agree to that, then we will fund you to travel to ARA, which is also a great experience, because not only are you going to ARA, but then there's other fellow specific events that you are invited to participate in.
There's a lot of questions related to guides that you might have at the National Academy for Writing.
Mm-hmm.
And someone mentioned that you have a quantitative guide and a qualitative guide, but not a mixed method. So just any guidance.
I'll have to look into that. I was just about to say we do have guidance for qualitative, quantitative, and I think let me do a quick search in there for all those who might be wondering. If you go to our main, I'll put it. Actually, we can't. If you go to our main website, naeducation.org, and then click on or hover over fellowships, and then click on the dissertation. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a link, or you'll see a drop down for resources, and that's where you will see all this different guidance that we do provide. I think I do know of a place that has mixed methods, so I will try to look for that right now and be able to provide it for you while Taylor and Dorothy answer more questions.
Okay. Yeah, so there is a question, is this entire dissertation single authored work? And that, because we have team science in some disciplines in education research, it's typical you might be using a data set that a PI in your lab or something collected. So does this question refer to all stages of the dissertation? My project needs to have at least more than one people to ensure high quality. Would this be okay? There have been successful applications that have come out of that team science approach where some of their papers would be co-authored. So just say no.
And just an update, I haven't been able to find what I was trying to remember, but I will look for it. And if whoever wrote that question in, if you don't mind just sending us an email at info@naeducation.org, then I'll be happy to respond to you.
There seems to be some confusion about the timeline, like when they would start. So we just may want to say that again, Jack.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the start of the fellowship, the earliest will be June of 2025. So you were applying now for essentially the 2025-2026 academic year. Now, we do have some wiggle room in there. The majority of people will start like June 25, 2025, or between June 2025 and September 2025. The minimum amount that you can have the fellowship is 9 months. The latest you could start the fellowship is, I think, January of 2026.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay, but that is like absolute latest and not very often taken on. So most people will begin in June, July, August of next year.
Dorothy, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
It says the application portal asks for personal publications and fellowship experiences. Do you know how these experiences will play a role within the selection process?
I think that when we're thinking about who is the applicant, we'll look at that information to say, does this give us further support that this is someone that's in the education or education-related space? And so you want to include those things that would contribute to that knowledge that we're accumulating about you being a strong applicant. That's a good question.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Someone's asking about the specific references and citations. Please definitely use these citations that are appropriate for your field of study. However, we don't discriminate between like MLA, APA, and Chicago. Whatever is best applicable to your project is appropriate.
And there's a number of questions related to word limits, space constrictions, and there are word limits and page limits.
Yes, in fact,
There are, I don't know them off the top of my head. I don't know if Taylor does, but they are listed in our application. And I think they're also listed on our main page. If you, just in case you don't know, you are more than welcome to start an application now. You don't have to wait till deadline. You can go in there and you can see all the information that we're requesting, and you can save your progress as you go. So if you have yet to open the portal and check it out, I do recommend doing so, because then that will give you a better idea of, the information that we're looking for.
And so specifically with the narrative on our website, it says no more than 10 double-spaced pages with 1-inch margins at 11-point Times New Roman font. It's just an example of one of our parameters in terms of what you're uploading in PDF format. But then we also have short answer responses, and it gives you the word limit. And typically it's around 100 to 250 word counts for specific questions outside of your narrative. And then I recall seeing another question about what do writers of recommendation receive? When you input their name, your relationship with them, and their email within the application portal, you can automatically send them a link so that they can drop in their letter of recommendation. And then with that link, it also gives them like basic outlines of like, who are you, like, what is your relationship with this individual? Why do you think that their project is strong? And do you see any like major contributions to their research project that this would help? Do you see major contributions within the field of education that this project is like really good to focus on? And so they are prompted with like a series of like 4 or 5 questions that they can answer. Of course, they can always add more, but it's pretty simplistic as to what we're asking them to write. But definitely ask them ahead of time so that they know that the link is coming and so that they have an appropriate amount of time to write that letter.
A connected item in here, something that our application portal allows for, is that you as the applicant can submit your application before the references are submitted. So just in case you're ready to go to submit your application, and you think that you have to wait for the references to be in, know that that's not the case. Now, we still need all the material for your application to be considered complete. So if October 3rd, 5 p.m. Eastern comes around and we have yet to receive the references, but you've submitted your application, then that is still considered an incomplete application. So I do recommend going ahead and just submit your application if you're ready to go. but then make sure that you're nudging your reference writers over the course of the next few weeks if you're waiting on them. We do send notices, but it's always important for you yourself to also be on there doing the nudging. And Taylor mentioned this earlier. It happens every application cycle. It is unfortunate, but there will be applicants who are flooding the system the last 30 minutes, hour of the day, which will then cause technical challenges. So we do very much recommend, even though our date is October 3rd, that you consider October 2nd your deadline and try to submit everything as much as possible early. Because once it comes to the very end of the day, and if Taylor and I, we make sure we clear our timeline or our date so that we're just focused on anything that might come in that date. But there are sometimes too many messages that we're receiving. And if something's not submitted on time, then it's outside the deadline. So again, just to emphasize, please do try to submit sooner than later.
So Jack, there's several questions. In one of your slides, you had indicated that they had to be in the final analysis stage. You referred to final analysis, and they're asking for a definition of how are you defining final analysis, especially in the context of ethnographic studies that continually go on. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think for that it's dependent as well on the discipline. So it's a little challenging.
Yeah.
And that's something that is taken into consideration when committee members are reviewing the work. I think a guiding question here is, will you be able to meet the different requirements of your research by the end of your fellowship? And that, I would say that's the goal. So if you need to complete like additional, if we're looking at ethnographic study, if you need to continue to do the research during the actual fellowship, then that's okay. The main goal here is that you're ABD by June 1st of 2025.
And to just add to that, that there's a number of questions for folks that are saying that they are trying to graduate in May of 2025. Can they use the fellowship to push out articles, papers, and conferences after graduation?
It sounds like you would be outside the timeline, yeah.
Yeah.
We do have a question here. If we are solely looking to fund people who intend to continue their career in academia, or if we're open to education researchers or others, and the answer is the latter. So you do not have to go into academia. Our interest is, though, are you going to continue in the field of education research? And that's broadly conceived. So we are trying to invest in individuals who want to further education research. We are not requiring that you have to be in academia to do so.
Someone's asking about, so does your home institution factor into eligibility for the fellowships? For example, if they have a doctoral student and another program on their campus has received the fellowship in the past, will this impact someone else's eligibility from the same institution but within a different department?
That meaning you will accept multiple applications from the same institution, the same department, the same advisor. Yeah, there's no caps, right? So it's not like University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill can only have 3 applications. There is no pre-competition or limits to, yeah.
All right, I have a question here. If we have any examples of successful applications, this is something that we currently do not provide online. It is something that we have actively discussed and are continuing to discuss, but But at this moment, we do not showcase previous applications. We do, however, have a list of all our awardees over the past several years. And, you know, that's a great opportunity to go in there and see who has won it in the past, the institutions, the disciplines, the body of work. And I share that as a way of saying that that's an opportunity that if you want to look further into um, potentially networking, or maybe you know somebody that's received the award, that you can reach out to them for guidance. I also want to say that just because you may not see your area of work listed in our awardees section, that doesn't mean we're not accepting your kind of work. It just means we haven't funded that area of research yet. And so you should definitely apply, because if it's within the field of education research, we're very much interested in reviewing it.
Yeah, Jack, that's a good point. Someone had asked how many special education focused awardees. We definitely have a number of applications. So yes, if you're in special ed, very, very important area.
And I think we have maybe 2 or 3 in special ed from this last year who were awarded.
I think so, yeah.
Again, we have a great filter tool so that you can go into, it's actually naeducation.org/awardees. And if you go in there, you can filter down by discipline, year, fellowship. You can do a search as well for keywords. So it's a good tool to be able to use to see what has been funded in the past.
Mhm.
We have a question here about, is there a difference between starting the fellowship in June 2025 as opposed to September 2025? There is no difference. It's just that sometimes, depending on whether or not the fellow is working with their institution to receive the funding, or being or self-funding, as in they're receiving the money directly, there might be different requirements. So there really is no difference. Everyone still is considered in your case, a 2025 fellow, and that you would still come to the fall and spring and ARA. Everything's the same. Well, I guess I should say, except for we do request updates throughout your fellowship. So if you start in June as opposed to September, your interim report will be due sooner than the person that's due in September. That's the only difference.
To go alongside with institutionally administered and self-administered, we have a question about monthly tax deductions on the fellowship stipend. As of right now, we'll provide, if you are awarded the fellowship, it's traditionally 2 stipends. And we provide you that lump sum, and then we provide the tax documentation afterwards. And so we're not pre-taking taxes if you are self-administered and or institutionally administered.
Question here about if applicants are applying to other fellowships, how does that affect our decision making? We welcome you to apply to other fellowships. We just ask that you please keep us up to date on the awarding or the process that you're going through, if you're going through the selection process. If you receive an internal fellowship, so say you're at the University of North Carolina and you receive the University of North Carolina fellowship for being awesome, then that is more than okay for you to receive, and it will not be in competition or in conflict with the NAEd Spencer Dissertation Fellowship. Now, if you were to receive the Ford, which I think they might have just discontinued, or ARA Minority Fellowship, or some other named fellowship that's an external award, then that would most likely be a conflict, and we would need to discuss with you how best to move forward. And most likely you would have to choose one or the other, but that is something that we will discuss with you. But for now, you should not apply to more fellowships if you would like to.
There's a few questions whether or not to include under review or in press accepted papers as publications. If there's space, absolutely. That shows kind of what you're up to and what's in the pipeline. Yep.
So we have a question here about the mentoring program. I think the mentoring program is like one of the key aspects of the fellowship, something that we very much enjoy being able to facilitate for awardees as staff. And I think there's like 2 or 3 components within the mentorship that we put together. First, it's a duration fellowship. So when you first start the fellowship, we're going to ask you, who would you like to be mentored from a big list of names. These are NAEd members that you get to select from, and postdoctoral alumni. And you get to go through and share with Taylor and I who the individuals are that you would most like to receive mentorship from. From there, we try to pair you as much as possible with the people that you select, one of them, but one of the people that you put down in there. You will then meet with your mentor 3 times throughout the year on an official meeting capacity. But what we're hoping is that through the mentorship, it will then start a relationship, either, a friendship or professional relationship that you can then receive mentorship moving forward outside of the fellowship period. The mentorship is probably one of the takeaways that our fellows have said was the greatest experience that they had when it came to their fellowship period, along with, I would say, probably second, like the cohort and meeting the other fellows as well. So the mentorship is a great opportunity and one that we're very happy to be able to provide.
Someone has asked a question about the selection committee. Are the reviewers previous Spencer awardees? So the selection committee and the external reviewers is a combination of our alum who have received one of our dissertation and/or postdoctoral awards, but then also members of the NAEd who are pristine in their disciplines. And so we can ensure that your application materials are being read by individuals that have made significant contributions to their specific fields already.
Mm-hmm. There's a question of, there's a few of these, maybe a conflict of interest. I think my advisor chair is involved at some level in the Spencer Foundation. I'm not sure which committee or area. Can they still be my letter of rec? Yes.
Yeah. So, sometimes this happens where there's a conflict of interest, and the process that we take is we ask our selection committee members to self-identify if they have a conflict of interest with the individual. And then we go through a process where the committee member is not a part of the review process, so that we can make sure that we have like an objective review of what is taking place as well. What is taking place during the committee process. Wow. But you should definitely, if you believe that they would be a great reference writer for you, then you should definitely still reach out to them and ask them for you to complete it.
Is it possible to apply another year if you're not selected this cycle? Absolutely, we have repeat applications.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a penalty for having applied before? Absolutely not.
A connected thread to that we often get is, do I receive any feedback for the application that I submitted? With the NAEd Spencer Dissertation Fellowship, we currently do not provide feedback to applicants. It is something that we currently do for our postdoctoral fellows, and it is something that we have discussed in the past. But at the moment, we do not provide feedback to NAEd Spencer Fellowship applicants.
We have a question about what the funds can be spent on. And realistically, the fellowship covers expenses including living expenses, medical and dental insurance, research equipment, expenses on books, workshops, conferences, and things like that. But our hope is that these funds alleviate any types of additional stressors that you might have while in the writing phase of your dissertation. And then along with that, there is also a limitation of how many, I guess, external hours you are able to work, just to make sure that you stay focused on your writing. So our preference is no more than 10 hours of additional work, just to make sure that you are still able to focus on the writing portion of your dissertation.
I have a question here, just reviewing the process that we go through. So the deadline is October 3rd. Once more, that is a hard deadline. Once that takes place, we begin our review process. February is when the committee is going to meet and make a determination on who will be the semifinalists. This means that we anticipate notifying everybody if you are moving forward or not as a semifinalist, either in late February or March. If you are notified that you are a semifinalist, there are items that we're going to request for you to complete, and the turnaround time is quite quick. I think 2 weeks maybe at most. So I would say if you are a semifinalist, then you try to complete that information as quickly as possible. So I would just note that in March you might need to do some work. And then we go through another review process and we meet again in April. This year we're meeting pretty late in April, which means that you will not be notified until May that whether or not you're going to be a finalist. I think we have time for one more question in case Taylor or Dorothy, you found one.
Looking for a good one.
Oh, they asked again, is there a separate webinar with guidance for people who have defended? So if you want to pitch your postdoc webinar, it's next week.
That's a great transition. So thank you. So yes, next week, just in case you're at the wrong webinar or you're interested, next week we will be having the NAEd Spencer Postdoctoral Fellowship webinar. For that webinar, we will be, well, I should say Taylor will be joined by the postdoctoral chair, Luis Gomez. And so we very much welcome you to attend. That one begins at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it will also be recorded. So just in case you cannot attend it, it will be recorded and we will post it online as well. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. I know there were probably several questions that we did not get to. So please do write to us at info@naeducation.org. And we will be happy to try to respond to your question in a timely fashion. We will, as we've shared, we are recording this and we will be posting it within the next week or so, hopefully. With that, thank you to Taylor and thank you, Dorothy, for being here today, and thank you all for being here. We very much appreciate you thinking about this fellowship and also the time and effort it takes to apply for the fellowship. So with appreciation and thanks, we hope you all have a good day.